Hello, 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 friends. Today in our trip through 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, we want to take a look at verses 10, 11, and 12. And I have a lot I want to say on these verses, so I need to get right after it. I don't want to scare you off, but I hope I can keep my remarks to under 5 minutes. The first thing I want to note is what Paul writes in verses 10 and 12 when he talks about the importance of loving and believing the truth. In verse 10, he says people are perishing because they don't love the truth. And in verse 12, they will be condemned because they have not believed the truth. That reminds me of something an older Christian lady once said to me in Roswell, New Mexico. That was a long time ago, but I haven't forgotten it. She said, "Carrie, I think we've done a good job of teaching our children the truth. I'm just not so sure that we've done a good job teaching them to love the truth." Think about that, would you? We need to love the truth, to prefer it, and we need to believe it. And I think that might be an indictment of our culture today. I think there are a lot of people who don't even think that they can know the truth, much less believe it. But I don't know that our culture loves the truth like we should. Don't know that we prefer it. Something to think about. The next thing I want to point out and comment on is what Paul writes in verse 11. Now he's talking about people who do not love the truth and who therefore are perishing. And in verse 11, he writes that God sends them a delusion, leading them to believe what is false. Now, think about that passage with me. God is able and willing to send a lie to people that deludes them because they prefer to believe and hear what is false over what is true. Now in verse 9, Paul says that's what Satan does. Satan sends lying wonders to people. He's the father of lies, the Apostle John wrote. So my question is, how can an act of Satan also be called an act of God? Well, I'll share with you my best explanation of this passage and my best answer to this question, just for you to think about. It's the best I have right now. I think what this passage is telling us is that God will allow some people to believe a lie if that is what they want to do. That God will permit it to happen. I'm thinking now of a text in Romans chapter 1 where Paul writes that God gave people up to their lusts and to their lies and to what they wanted to believe. You know, it's possible for a person to pursue a course that God will give him up to. I didn't say that very well, did I? What I mean is that if a person prefers a certain course of life, if a person prefers to believe a lie, God will permit that person to believe the lie and will give them up to that lie and to that lifestyle. So perhaps an act of Satan can be called an act of God in the sense that God permits Satan to perform the act. Satan sends the lie. People would rather believe the lie than believe the truth. And so God allows or permits that process to occur. It's not really that God directly sends the lie to someone, but that God permits Satan to send the lie to people who would rather believe it than the truth. Well, something to think about. Lastly, I want to apply this verse to my own life, and I'll tell you how I applied it when I read it. I always want to be a person who is open to new ideas and to suggestions. And I'll admit to you that I'm not always open to new ideas. And sometimes I don't take suggestions very well. My prayer is that God will give me an open mind, that God will keep me from prejudice, that God will give me the attitude and the spirit that is always willing to examine and re-examine and ask questions and search for answers. Let me tell you a little story, and then I'll close for this comment today. A few days ago, I sent a birthday greeting to a longtime friend of mine, Mr. Joe Park. It was Joe's 82nd birthday. Joe was a conversation partner of mine and a dear friend of mine when we lived in Oklahoma City at the Wilshire Church. In fact, that was 35 years ago. My goodness, we're getting older, aren't we, Joe? 35 years ago, he was a dear friend and a conversation partner of mine. And in the birthday greeting, I expressed my appreciation for him and for all that he had meant to me over the years, and appreciation that our paths had crossed 35 years ago. And I want to read to you the reply that he sent to me on Facebook. Joe wrote, "We were fortunate that God put us in each other's way at a time when Raymond Kelsey was telling us to always question our understanding of the Word. He continued his whole life to study the Bible, to learn something new, or to relearn. I miss you and thank God for putting you in my path. Ditto, Joe." And then he closed his remarks with these words, "Keep learning." Boy, that's good advice for all of us, especially in light of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 11. The advice is to keep learning, to keep an open mind, to study the Bible, and remain willing to question your understanding of the Word. We never want to reach the point when we would believe a lie. We want to love the truth, believe the truth, practice the truth, be open to the truth. Okay, I've talked long enough and given you a lot to think about, I'm sure. I'll talk with you again in a few days, Lord willing.